This episode of the CUInsight Experience podcast is sponsored by Alacrity, a leading payments fintech helping credit unions modernize money movement. Alacrity enables real-time money movement experiences for loan payments, A2A transfers, digital disbursements, and bill pay. Through a single cloud-native platform that connects to RTP, FedNow, FedWire, ACH, Visa Direct, and Zeal, credit unions can progressively modernize without overhauling legacy systems. Learn more at alacrity.com.
Welcome back to the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and I'm here with my co-host, my partner in podcasting and life, Jill Nowacki.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jill Nowacki, founder and CEO of Humanidei. And today's conversation is one I'm really excited about because it's not about resumes or job titles. It's about those moments that quietly, maybe even unexpectedly, shape a career.
Exactly. And our guest today has had a front row seat to leadership in the credit union movement for decades now. But like most meaningful careers, his path, I'm sure, wasn't always just a straight line from where he started. So,
President and CEO of America's Credit Unions. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I feel like I've arrived.
We're so excited to have you. We've been looking forward to this conversation. It's funny. We kind of put together this arc for this season about like purpose-driven leadership, and like your name, we were just like, oh, we got to get Scott on for this topic, just even with the transition you've had over the past few years, right? So I think it's going to be a great show. So as Joe mentioned, the idea today is talking about those moments that shaped the career, to not just like the milestones that people see on LinkedIn or in a press release, but the opportunities, the doors that opened at just the right time, and the people that kind of helped you move forward.
And maybe just as importantly, how you recognize those moments when they showed up so you were ready to take advantage of those opportunities.
To kind of jump into this, and Jill and I can talk on this as well, because we were kind of thinking back on our careers. But when you look back, were there those kind of big green light moments in your career where you're like, something opened up and you knew you had to move on it, even if it seemed scary at the time?
Yeah. Well, I would say that every job change that I've made had one of those moments. It's like a hinge point. You can tell that that's where it turned. I did not begin my career path. And it feels sort of like when you describe what I've done as a career path, it feels like it was orchestrated. I sort of followed my nose. I don't know how else to say it. Like, I'm a person of faith. I feel like there is a reason for things. That's the way I choose to look at life and kind of the reference frame. But I've also I've not had an Old Testament prophet show up at my door and tell me where I should go. I felt like if I kept motoring, God would bend the road. If I try to do good and keep motoring, then things will move in my life in the right direction. And that's the kind of the way I've looked at it. And in retrospect, I'm not sure I was cognizant of it in real time, but in retrospect, I can absolutely see these moments in my life. I went into politics. I had a friend in politics who ended up working for the Utah Republican Party. He was the executive director, and he needed a communications director. And I had come out of school. He and I were we were friends that had worked together in a previous job, and he was on a path that was very interesting to me. And he asked me to come be the communications director at the Utah Republican Party. And this was back in the 90s. That brand was a slightly different brand than it is today, but it was also ascendant. In Utah, the GOP controlled everything, and it was a significant place to be. And I was young and stupid. And also, there's a measure of hubris of youth. Like, of course I can do this, was the mentality. And again, that's another thing in retrospect, after your frontal cortex fully forms, like, I'm like, oh, that was pretty arrogant. Looking back, like the fact that I just thought I could do that.
I mean, when you think about that, because I love going back to that point and what you say about when we were young, sometimes we just do, right? So then you get to credit unions. Like, how did suddenly you're in an exciting place that is politics, and you're at the epicenter of it in your home state in Utah, and then you're like, was there something that then all of a sudden credit unions comes up, and obviously now decades later.
Yeah, so this is a great story, and there's a couple of facets to it, and I can keep going. So I'll try to be succinct. But I was working in Washington, and the bank credit union fight was fevered pitch. I worked for Senator Hatch for a while and had come back to help somebody run for Congress. It was in the middle of a bank credit union fight, and the league needed help. They had just been roughed up in a legislative session. And for years, they had kind of relied on the white hat to be the sufficient defense, and they really needed to just invest in political chops. And I guess I was a representation of some of that. Just a few months after I had just started, there was a CEO change. They had decided to move. And one day I was just sitting in the office and the board chair had walked by. There was a board meeting. I wasn't involved in it. It was kind of a secret meeting, I guess. I don't know. But the board chair came and opened the door and said, "There's a vacancy at the CEO position. We expect you to apply," and closed the door and left. And now you've set the stage a little bit. I was the first league president. I'm pretty sure I was the first league president in America that did not come up as either in the credit union league space, like the operational space, or a credit union. I was purely a political hack from the out. I came in sideways. And there was an incumbent leader, an EVP of the league that was in line. And I thought to myself and counseled some folks around me, and I'm like, I'm going to do this. And so I went in and talked to this gentleman. He could have been my father. There was a seasoning difference between the two of us. And I said, I'm doing this not because of how I feel about you, but it just is a carpe diem moment. I don't know if it'll match, but I'll do it. Well, I got picked. He didn't. And this was incredible. Like, I don't know in retrospect with the fully formed frontal cortex if I would have the courage to do what I did in that moment. But what I did witness in him was magnanimous statesmanship. He was jumped over by a punk. And there are many ways that he could have played that. I remember the day that it was announced. I walked into his office and I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I'm going to need a couple of days." And he had a child getting married that weekend. He took 4 days, and then he came back and we met and we charted the path. And he was now my EVP. And I'm telling you, the choice that he made to lean in has transformed my career. And he became like the oracle of credit union philosophy, not just for me, but I mean, he held my hand through all of because I was still new, but he helped me see the operational. He's a former CEO, credit union CEO. He stood up the shared branching network in our area there. He was just a legend and ran the service corporation for the league. He was a legend. And he just took me by the hand in spite of the fact that he had been jumped over by a punk. And he's still around, and we've talked about this a lot. And we actually, at the league, we published a book of his work because it's almost like a textbook of the fight and the philosophy, kind of, why we do this. Think about the influence that his decision has had
Absolutely.
on the national that is system. And you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
just because of the way he decided to help guide me and use his energy and the emotional discipline required for that. And so my observation of that in the moment was staggering. And from this view, it's absolutely amazing to me.
Scott, you did something in telling that story, though. I work as you know well, I work with a lot of executive placements, and we have a lot of situations where the board might be looking at both internal and external candidates, and the external gets chosen. And it sounds like such a small thing when you say, I went into his office and asked, "Are you okay?" And the number of people who don't have the courage to ask that question or have that conversation always.
Because we don't hear the answer, right?
And because we don't want to hear the answer, or we don't want somebody to say, "Why in the world did they pick you and not me?" And it feels hard to be able to, like, now we have to justify the choice. Or if the person is emotional, maybe we're not comfortable with their emotions. But the difference I've heard from CEOs I've placed who have been willing to have that conversation to say, "Are we okay? Can we move forward?" makes such a huge, as you said, it changes the trajectory. It increases the likelihood of the CEO's success when they are able to put it out on the table right there. And so often I feel like there's a fear to talk about the elephant in the room, and we're sort of hopeful maybe just no one will ever know that happened and we can just move on and pretend it never did. So as much as that executive had to own a lot of that, even just you taking that step to have the courage to ask if he was okay probably also shifted that trajectory, I would imagine.
Oh, maybe so. I mean, I do think empathy is one of the more expensive human emotions. It takes emotional discipline. And I think that gets lost in leadership a lot, is the ability to sort of feel what other people are feeling, because that can also take you off course. Anyway, if I'm looking back on my credit union career, his decision and his interaction with that transformation was just amazing to me. Absolutely amazing. And then I have this great playground in which to exercise my capabilities and skill set, right? We had this hostile anti-credit union environment and well-resourced, highly passionate credit unions that were ready to play and had the taste of red meat in their mouth. They were like, let's go. And that was all just fantastic. And then, I've had other moments along the way, Diana and I talking about what the future could look like for leagues and can we redesign that? That created another moment where, like, going to my wife, whose name is Samantha, and saying, "Hey, Sam, how do you feel about Sacramento?" and
And she's
and
like,
then we
okay, how
had,
about DC then?
and then we just had another one of those conversations, and we sort of look at each other. Let's do it. So.
That has to be a little bit full circle, like you said, working for Hatch and being in DC, and now you're coming back.
It's actually interesting. I went to a White House meeting. One of the assistants to the president works on the National Economic Council. The guy that vets and pushes through people for consideration to the NCUA board, these presidential appointees in the financial services space, is a fellow Hatch alum. I hadn't put that together until we had the meeting. So, yeah, it is a full circle moment.
When you think back, and I still love you kind of going back in that kind of your journey there. When you look back on it now, when you've had that kind of time to reflect over a career, like how has that changed you as a leader? I find leadership to be such an interesting thing because there is that point of like being young and confident. And then there's also like, it seems like I think we all get to a point in our career where we start to realize that we didn't know as much as we thought we knew. We didn't know we didn't know, right? So in reflection, I've always found it's like, okay, I can see how that shaped me to be the person that I am.
Yeah. Well, I think the fact that we make such significant choices in our lives before we're fully formed and that hubris of youth, it's actually how the species perpetuates itself, right? Because as we get older and wiser, we recognize safety differently. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, one thing that I've definitely had to become cognizant of is, look, don't retreat to safety. In spite of the fact that you can see the horizon maybe more fully than you did when you were 30, you still gotta lean forward with all the aspiration of that arrogant youth. That's how you move. And so I'm in this pursuit of both, which may be impossible, but like, how do I use the seasoning and wisdom and the discipline that was displayed by this gentleman in my career and still hold on to that confident swagger that has me, run to the fire. You got to do both of those things.
That's an interesting segue into kind of this thought about sometimes when people are earlier in their careers, it's not just that as we get a little older, we have that retreat to safety, but when we're a little younger, sometimes we have a tendency to be a little less patient too. There's more of this sense of urgency, like we have to move forward. We have to find that next thing. And there may be a lot of listeners right now who feel like they're ready. They want that next opportunity and they're waiting for it. So whether they're waiting for that tap on the shoulder or the door to open or that person on ahead of them on the org chart to finally retire, but they're eager and they want to make the move, but they feel maybe like they're having to be more patient than they would like to in that process. What advice would you give for someone in that season? So that maybe more focus on urgency, eagerness, wanting that next opportunity, maybe more so than the patience and the persistence to kind of take the steps through it.
Yeah. I mean, I do think the pathways do clarify. And if it feels like you're trapped and can't move, then maybe it is time to move. Doing that inside of an organization can be complicated because that, openings only come when they come. You can't force those. And so, yeah, that is an outstanding question. I guess my advice would be don't stop moving. That's what I said before. Like, you got to keep motoring. the road will bend. It just keep motoring. I genuinely believe that that's true.
It sounds like to me that you have like something I know Jill and I both share, where it's like that kind of like that growth mindset where you're constantly trying to grow. I mean, like you look for the new challenge, the new opportunity, the whatever that happens to be. So when you've been in, like, as you made your way into credit unions, as you're then, even before America's credit unions, when you were, the Utah and the California League and bringing all that, like, how do you mentally stay prepared so that you're ready to take advantage of these opportunities when they do persist? And is it just like a constant conversation that's kind of going on around you that you're like, well, what about Scott? Or what can we do here?
I don't know. I mean, I do think you can get over your skis. And I've seen that. I think we've all seen that in our periphery and maybe even in our own lives. There are these moments where our own ambitions can get us over our skis and not ultimately help us in our desire to advance. I do think the thing that does help you in your desire to advance is to brilliantly execute in the sphere that you're in. I had this leader that told this story about this group of people that are trying to move a piano, and somebody just said, and they were struggling, and somebody said, just lift where you stand. They had all these people around a grand piano, and they're like, just lift the part that you have. That's what I've tried to do. I was in a fraction of the credit union's national ecosystem in Utah, right? Mm-hmm. Relatively small fraction of the ecosystem. But it was this in high intensity arena in which to play. And I just couldn't fix everything. And I didn't have the aspiration to like go beyond that. I just thought I have one responsibility and I'm going to focus on what I can control and try to brilliantly execute to the best that I can in that space. And then contribute wherever I can, be a net contributor beyond that space. But focusing on that was my primary goal. And so that's my advice is lift where you stand. Like that's a great phrase. Do the work where you're at brilliantly and then find out how to be a net contributor. Mm-hmm. And then I think the road will bend. The opportunities will present themselves. I'm not saying they'll come to you, but they will be presented in some way. And you still have to act. You still have to send your resume when an opportunity comes, right? You still
not just going to come to you.
That's you still have to act, but I do think that those things come as you execute in the sphere that you do have the levers of control.
I probably should operate with some restraint here, but I'm not going to. And this is a little bit of a left turn, but I'm making it, not Scott. So I feel like it's okay if I think something that's really, it's specific to your situation in Utah, but I think it's certainly relevant on the league national association system, but I think it's relevant for our credit union system too. And it goes back to that idea of you recognized Utah was a small part of this national ecosystem, but what we know is true by watching advocacy efforts in our credit union space, something that happens in Utah, we can say, oh, it's a small state, it's a smaller number of credit unions. And this was like 2001, right? Where this tax battle was, okay. Mm-hmm. So it was, the whole system was watching Utah and watching how you navigated that. And so that idea of executing brilliantly was creating a playbook for other leagues, for other association advocacy work. And that's something that I think, again, so I'm evangelizing a little bit here, but it's something that matters so much in how our system plays together still today on that. And if you had lost, Scott, instead of executing brilliantly in that too would have changed the nature of the credit union system moving forward on that. And I think that's something that it could have been really easy for a person in that role to have said, oh, well, the stakes aren't that high. It's just a small state. And really recognizing, no, what I do has to be brilliantly executed because it does ripple out from where we stand here. That matters. And I think even though this is, in my mind, a really clear lesson from state impact to national impact on that, I think there's truth in that in a natural person credit union too, that somebody who is identifying how to deal with cybersecurity fraud or how to make the best in digital payments if you execute that really well in your institution, that too could be something that does ripple out and have those effects. So just, I guess, a point of punctuation on how important it is to do, no matter how small you think that job is you have, as far as in the national industry, that impact it makes out. And I think what you said about your executive in Utah at the beginning of the conversation too, like that may have been a small thing for him to have said, okay, I'm going to show up and keep doing this. But maybe if he hadn't done it that way, you wouldn't be the CEO of America's credit unions today. And that, like, so it did have that, like, that little seemingly small thing done brilliant.
Yeah.
It can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and I just have to say, all of the philosophical fire that is deep in my bones now around credit unions, part of it is there's been blood hit the floor. I've been in the trench on it for so long that it's in me. But he sowed those seeds. For him, he made a decision that is influencing the person who is now the CEO of the National Trade Association. I don't think he thought that when he did it. He made a choice to go to work and clock in and to excel at his job. So, yeah. And then I think, Jill, what you just described is that it's also kind of a signal that, I mean, Utah is a small state. We're a relatively small market with some very strong sort of outsized punch above our weight class kind of credit unions. But in the ecosystem that is credit unions, the first 10 years as a league president, I didn't get on a single committee.
Oh, yeah.
I did not do a thing at ACUIL. I listened. I showed up. I went to every meeting and I sat in the corner and listened to everything and watched it develop. But it was 10 years before I think it was Mark Cummins that said, hey, you ought to consider getting on the ACUIL board. That was 10 years. So, and it was because of the circumstances. I mean, we had our heads down going in this fight. Just an interesting transformation. And I did not set out to do any of these things. I didn't begin my career thinking I would work in credit unions. I discovered it and instantly realized kind of the beauty of using my skill set, which can be poured into some really useless things, my kind of skill set, really useless things. But I instead am defending cooperative finance and the opportunity for people to have a transformation in their life. That's what I get to spend my day defending. And once I discovered that, I'm like, I am all in on this thing. I didn't begin 2025 thinking I'm going to be working for America's credit unions. That was not in my windshield. But here we are, January of 2026. And I've been trying not to get punched by the president of the United States on interchange or credit card rate cap or whatever it is. Yeah.
And you may not have an answer. I didn't cue you up that I would ask this question. I didn't know I was going to until just this moment, but you didn't start 2025 thinking that was on your bingo card to become the CEO of America's credit unions. Can you share any insight into when, I'm guessing it was more than just Nussle announcing his retirement that made you say, oh yeah, I'm the guy. And so what was that? What changed or what compelled you, what called you in that way?
So there were a couple of things. Korn Ferry, it was announced, and then Korn Ferry sent out their survey. In the survey, it went to all the league presidents and credit unions, I think even our partners. I don't know who else filled it out, but they did some listening, active listening. And in that survey, it asked you to fill out who you thought could serve. I didn't put myself on it. As you know, I was up to my neck in a project that was consuming me already. And I'm like, there's no way. I just got to stay with my head down. But I had a handful of people call and say, I put your name down. And that's sort of what happened. And then there was a call from Korn Ferry saying, your name's been put down a few times. Would you consider sending your resume? That was my moment, right? That was what I'm like, okay. And there were a lot of things to calculate, a lot of professional things. I'm like, well, it was premature in a lot of ways, not ideal timing for many things. Massively disrupting to my family culture.
You're going to say your family,
Yeah. Yep. But we kind of wrestled through it. And it was one of those things that felt like it had purpose. Just, I talked about at the beginning, that sometimes the chess pieces move and you're not moving them. And for me, I thought there must be purpose in this because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. I'm a bumpkin from a flyover state. This must make sense. And truthfully, if there's a selfish component to it, I was very concerned about the health of the credit union family.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, if nothing else, if I can get an opportunity to say the right things to the search committee, that might inform them on their process. If I get a chance to sort of say what I care about and what they should be looking for, then maybe that'll be helpful. And so I did want to make certain that the health of the family got addressed as soon as it could, because I think everybody knew that. You all could see it. I mean, right? There's this feeling of like, this is wobbly. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that we're out of the woods on all that, but we've got to, like, the capacity to like rally the family and say, look, there's only one way. The fracturing that could happen here is not a solution to the market reality that we are wildly outspent and out-resourced by the people that want to destroy this business model. And so the only pathway is to restore the health and vitality of the family. And so that was kind of the compelling moment for me, was okay. And then never really thought, oh yeah, this is gonna happen.
You made such a strong case for what you thought they needed to hear that they were like, you're right, great idea. Come on in and make that happen.
I guess.
Come make that happen, Scott. Right.
Somehow.
Here you go.
And then, November 3rd, I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I done?
Where did I just get myself into?
And it just continues. It just continues. Crazy.
I have to ask the podcast type question, just because Jill kind of mentioned a lot of younger leaders do listen to the show. And when we have somebody, as you're thinking, and I so much love this conversation because it has been a reflection right on your career for you, even then the podcast question, here it is, that idea. If you could give your younger self, now that your brain has fully formed or is closer to fully forming, what advice would you give your younger self where you sit today?
Yeah. Don't major in minor things. Office politics. Focus on what absolutely matters. One of the problems with the hubris of youth that I had was that I spoke about all of this in mafioso terms, like almost violent, like we got to go whack this guy, like policymakers, whatever. And the advice that I would give is to don't lose that zeal and passion, but don't trade on the cheapest human emotions, fear and contempt. This entire movement is built on compassion and empathy and carefully administering bounty to create opportunity, right? That's what it is. It's haves and have-nots. And credit unions are the arbiter, the ones that try to get to negotiate the good that can come at that intersection. And I think as human beings inside the credit union space, we need to reflect that philosophically in our own behavior, even as a mafioso fighter pilot mentality political hack. You can do that with extreme passion and not develop contempt. And that sort of requires discipline. That's the advice I would give myself, because I do think that's what's the seasoning of life gives you, is the capacity to look past those cheaper human emotions. You start hunting for them, the more expensive ones.
I think that's such sound advice. We're seeing you acknowledge the concern with the family becoming divided, and like we need to do some healing, some repair work with the credit union family. But I think it's fair to say, sort of regardless where you stand politically, if you stand politically, we see a higher level of division, not just inside the United States, but in global politics right now too. And you can hear a lot of that. They're fear-based reactions that are causing this division. And so if you can, like at the beginning, again, you talked about that leaders need to have empathy and understanding. If you're working through your leadership from a position of empathy, you're not going to do those things to stir fear or create fear or lead others down that path for that level of division too. So probably not just good advice for our younger selves, but probably good advice for all of us,
For all of us.
through the day too.
Something to remember. Well, this was awesome.
Indeed.
Jill, any final questions or thoughts for Scott before we let him go on his way and give him some of his day back?
Well, Scott, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for giving us the time to talk, for taking us down your path, not just in the last couple of years, but over the course of a really successful so far career in credit unions, which I say so far, not because I'm waiting to see what happens next, but because I know there's a lot more that you'll continue to give to this movement too. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your time with us today.
It's been an honor, and I could be fired at any minute, so who knows? Let's see. But thank you for the chance. Thank you for your platform and for using your voice in this way. It's all good stuff. What we just described is, your business as well, delivering information to the ecosystem with that intentionality and purpose is critical. So thank you.
Oh, we appreciate you, and we appreciate all the listeners out there. So with that, we say thank you again. We'll be back very soon. If you're listening and you enjoy, please hit the subscribe button on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all that good stuff wherever you listen. And we will be back soon. Thank y'all.
Until then, take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks again to Alacrity for sponsoring this episode of the CUInsight Experience podcast. To find out more about Alacrity, visit alacrity.com.